Today we're going to talk about dividing polynomials using what's known as polynomial long division. And one thing that I wanted to go ahead and relate this idea of dividing polynomials by long division is what we learned when we were back in grade school about how to actually just divide numbers by long division. So I want you guys to think back to grade school and think about, just imagine this. Take the number 324 and go ahead and divide that by 8, okay? Now remember, to do long division, what we did was we took this number that was here on the outside and we thought about how many times can you use 8 to make 32. And we know that 8 times 4 is 32. So 8 goes into 32 4 times. Then remember, we'd multiply these two and bring it down here and take the difference of the two. And 32 minus 32 would give you 0 and 4. Okay? Then we take this 8 and we would see how many times it goes into what's here after we brought this 4 down. And we know that 8 goes into 4 no times. All right? Then you multiply those two, 8 times 4, you get 0. You take the difference of those two, and you're left with 4. Okay? Now remember, this right here was known as your remainder. Okay? So we know that that's your remainder. So what we know is we know that 8 does not go into 324 evenly. It goes in 40, and then we have a remainder left over. So we actually took this remainder, and we did 4 divided by 8. And we know that 4 divided by 8 comes out to be 1/2. And so we know that our answer was 40.5, or 40 and 1/2. Okay? Now, this is very similar to that. We're going to take our polynomial, we're going to take what it's divided by, and we're going to put it into this format here. So for this one, you're going to have x minus 2, all right? And you're going to take, and you're going to say x squared plus 5x minus 14. So right now we have x squared plus 5x divided by x minus 2. And all we're going to do is we're going to look at this right here. X, how many times does x go into x squared? Well, we know this has to be x times x. So we would need to make another x here. So I'm going to bring an x up here. Now what you're going to do, I put it above my x term. You're going to multiply this right here. All right? So off to the side, you're going to have x times x would give you x squared. You also do x times negative 2, which would give you minus 2x. Now remember, though, we're actually going to take the difference of these two, so I'm going to subtract that, which means that this is going to become a positive sign right here, and we're going to see what we have left. All right? That and that cancel out, and you're left with 5x plus 2x would give you 7x. You take and you bring this down, so you have 7x minus 14. Now again, you look at this first term, x right here, and how many times does x, what do you need to do to make it into 7x? Well, you'd have to multiply it by a 7, okay? So if you multiply that by 7, you're going to put a plus 7 up here, all right? And what would that times that be? Well, that would be 7x. And then what would this times this be? It would be minus 14. Now remember, you take the difference of the two, so you're going to make this minus and this positive. And when you do that, you are left with 7x minus 7x cancels out. Negative 14 plus 14, that goes away, and you're left with a 0 down here. Okay? So you're left with the remainder of 0, which means if you have a remainder of 0, we have what's known as a factor theorem up here. Well, we now know that this x minus 2 is actually a factor of x squared plus 5x minus 14. So we know if we wanted to write that right there, all right, in factored form, you have these two factors. You have x minus 2, and now you have this right here, which is x plus 7. Okay? So the answer to this one, if you took and you divided those two, is this box up here, x plus 7. However, this down here is what's known now as your factored form because your remainder came out to be 0. Okay? Let's take a look at the next one. X to the third power plus x plus 30, all divided by x plus 3. So let's go ahead and let's organize this one. All right, so I'm going to use orange here. All right, so underneath my division symbol, we're going to put x to the third. Now you'll notice we're missing my x squared term. So I'm going to fill that with plus 0x squared plus x plus 30. And we're going to divide all of this by x plus 3. Okay? We take a look at this, and we take a look at this, and we know we would need to multiply this by x squared to get x to the third power. So, you're going to take x squared, and you're going to put it up here. Okay? X squared times this becomes x to the third power. X squared times this becomes plus 3x squared. You're going to take and subtract, and you're going to subtract right here. So now what's going to be left is we're going to go ahead and that is going to go to 0x to the third power. We're going to be left with minus 3x squared. Bring this down, okay, plus x. Now, what do you have to do to this to get this term right here? Well, you'd have to multiply this by a negative 3, and you'd have to multiply by an x. So I'm going to take up here, and I know I'd have to multiply this by negative 3x. I'm going to put it above my x term. And let's take and let's multiply these now. So I'm going to get minus 3x squared. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to end up with minus 9x. And then remember, we take the difference. So a minus and a minus become a positive, and a positive here. Those would cancel out. Okay? Those would go ahead and you get 0x squared. And then you're going to go ahead and have this becomes 10x, and you're going to bring this all the way down, so you're going to have plus 30. Now, what would you have to do to this to get 10x? Well, you'd have to multiply it by a positive 10. So I'm going to put plus 10 up here. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to multiply this times this would give me a plus 10x. And then this times that would give me a plus 30. I change the signs on both of these down here. Alright, and I'm going to end up with a 0 down here. Which means that this, again, remember, a remainder of 0, means that this is a factor of this. However, our answer for this one, alright, x to the third plus x plus 30 divided by x plus 3 is going to equal x squared minus 3x plus 10. Okay? It's whatever that number up there is. Excuse me, that polynomial up there is. Okay? Now, let's continue on. Alright, number 3, we're dividing by an x squared here. Okay? So, let's go ahead and let's set it up. I'm going to use a different color. X squared minus, alright, we got x squared minus 3. However, we have no x term. So I'm actually going to add an x term in there by putting 0x minus 3. And I'm going to divide that whole thing by 8x to the third plus 5x squared minus 12x plus 10. Okay? We look at the first term, x squared. What would we need to multiply this by to make it into that? All right? And we would actually have to go ahead and multiply it by 8x. So I'm actually going to take this, and I'm going to multiply it by 8x, which means I'm going to actually put it right here. So I got 8x. Now, when you go ahead and you multiply this out, you're going to end up with 8x to the third. You multiply this, you're going to end up with plus 0x squared. And when you multiply that, you're going to end up with minus 24x. Okay? Now, when you go ahead and you do that, now you're going to go ahead, you're going to make it a minus, and a plus. This would go to 0. This right here would go to 5x squared. This would go to plus 12x. And this would go to plus 10. Okay, because you take and you bring this down. Now, what would we have to multiply this by to get this? Well, we'd have to multiply it by a positive 5. So I'm going to put plus 5 up here. And when you take and you multiply all that out, you get plus 5x squared. You go ahead and you get plus 0x. And you go ahead and you get a minus 15. Okay? So this becomes a minus, and a plus. That right there goes to 0. This becomes a 12x. And this right here becomes a plus 25. All right, now we have nothing else that we can go ahead and divide. So I want you to recognize that this right here isn't 0. So this is your remainder, okay? So we now know that x squared minus 3, all right, doesn't go into this polynomial evenly. So if we were asked what this is divided, we know it's going to equal, all right, 8x plus 5. And then you have to add on your remainder, 12x plus 25. But the remainder is always divided by the original polynomial that we went ahead and we divided. So this right here, guys, is your answer for your long division problem of x to the third plus 5x squared minus 12x plus 10 divided by x squared minus 3. Okay. Let's go ahead and end it there. Let's try one more. All right, let's go to number 5 here, okay? Let's go ahead and let's do this long division problem. All right, you got x plus 5. And then you got x to the 4th. All right, you got plus 4x to the 3rd. You notice we have no squared variable, so I'm going to put plus 0x squared. And then I have plus 16x, all right, minus 35. Now we need to look at the first one. What do we need to multiply that by to get this? And we know we're going to multiply by x to the 3rd power. If we multiply those two out, we're going to get x to the 4th, all right, plus 5x to the 3rd. Subtract, subtract, we're going to get minus x to the 3rd plus 0x squared. All right, we got to multiply this by a negative x squared. All right, so when you multiply those two together, you get negative x to the 3rd, and you end up with minus 5x squared. Switch the sign, switch the sign. I get 5x squared. Bring this down, plus 16x. You got to multiply that by a plus 5x. Then you're going to have 5x squared, all right, plus 25x. Switch the sign, switch the sign. So I'm going to be left with a minus 9x minus 35. You multiply that by a minus 9, okay? And then that underneath there would become, running out of room here, guys. That would become a minus 9x, and then it would be minus 45. When you switch the sign and switch the sign, you're left with a remainder of equal to 10. All right? So since we have a remainder, remember this is not a factor of that polynomial, so our solution to this one is that when you divide the two, you get x third minus x squared plus 5x minus 9, and then you add on your remainder and x over x plus 5. So guys, this is one way to go ahead and divide polynomials.